Great. Let's get started. Welcome back, everyone. I want to introduce our next speaker, Stuart Browne with ResultingIT. His talk is going to be Becoming a Technology Revolutionist. I tried to do some interesting stuff with AI. AI has done an amazing job with translation, right? You can translate now, basically. We could be in this room, someone could be talking Japanese or any other language, and you could very quickly translate through your phones, right? So I was going to get that for Stuart because his British accent is sometimes difficult to understand, but I didn't get the app on time or enough licenses. So we get Stuart. And Stuart's another guy that, if you've ever followed Stuart, I love Stuart's posts on LinkedIn. They're not like short little posts, they're long and in-depth posts that you want to read and read it again because they truly make you think, and he throws off all kinds of metaphors that most of mine don't even understand, but he throws them out there anyways. So, Stuart, welcome.
Making sure you're ready. The organizers told me before we started that in this room today, there's a number of revolutionists. Okay? I've got no idea who they are. I think one of the problems is they also have no idea who they are. Right? The revolutionists in this room haven't figured out that they're revolutionists yet. They've just not worked it out. They've not heard the calling. So, before we start, I'm going to ask you something that's a question you need to answer inside your own head and take a few moments to do it. And it might be the most difficult thing you've ever had to answer before, which is it you? Are you the revolutionist? Are you the person that in the next couple of years is either going to start a revolution or support a revolution? Because you've heard a whole load of stuff today that's quite scary and it's revolutionary, and the world needs quite a few revolutionists. So just take a moment before I carry on to ask yourself, do you think you're up for it? Do you think you're up for being a revolutionist? And while you're thinking that through, if this works, there we go. The way I'm going to do this today, I'm going to ask you to imagine that you're back at school when learning was new. And I'm going to take you through 3 lessons. Really, really quick biology lesson, a slightly longer geography lesson, and then a really long history lesson. So let's do biology first. And by the way, by the end of this, before I go into that, by the end of this, what I'm going to give you is 5 things, 5 takeaways that might kind of enable you to patch your mental operating system to become a revolutionist. So let's start with biology. An admission, I hate butterflies. Absolutely hate butterflies. And the reason is they've been ruined by strategy consultants, systems integrators, GSIs, because they use them as a metaphor to explain how transformation should work. And based on everything I read, transformation doesn't seem to be working. 70 to 90% of transformations apparently are failing. I mean, it's a transformation metaphor. Rather than caterpillars to beautiful, vibrant butterflies, we may as well use maggots to houseflies, right? Just not working. And then you get guys like this, the doom mongers, chicken lickings, right? The world's about to end. Massive ERP failure. It's really interesting. These guys use the same hand movements, and I've got a really warped view of what massive is. The problem this guy's got, or all these guys have got, is what they do is they look at failure and try and use failure to work out how to be successful, which is bullshit, right? If a 70-year-old lady crashes a Prius, us working out why doesn't make her a NASCAR driver, right? You can't analyse failure to say, how am I successful? Success leaves clues behind. The only way to be successful is to analyse success. So that's the end of the biology lesson. apart from the fact that we're not going to talk about transformation today, we're going to talk about revolution. Now, Paul always mocks my accent. I knew this would be coming. So I thought I'd fill you in on where I'm from. This is the geography lesson. This is a map of the northwest of England. City of Liverpool, city of Manchester. Anyone who follows football or soccer, whatever you want to call it, will know there's big teams in both of those cities. In Liverpool, there's Liverpool and Everton. In Manchester, there's Manchester United and Manchester City. Reds and blues in each city. It's like the Matrix. If you live around there, you choose the red pill or the blue pill. Yeah? Once you've chosen it, you've got to stick with it. They're really competitive within each other and across the cities as well. The other thing you've got going on around here is it's a hotbed for music. So everyone knows that the Beatles came from Liverpool. And I couldn't list all the bands on there, but if you research it, some of the bands that come from Manchester and Liverpool, there's a huge list of them. I don't come from Manchester or Liverpool. Where I come from and where ResultingIT is based is in a town just between those two called Warrington. Okay? That's a 32-mile gap, so I'm exactly in the middle of that in no man's land. So now we're going to go to the history lesson. So this is a map from 1607, and that's the same place. And on that map, you'll see a little tiny bridge that crosses that river. So I think Warrington was in the Domesday Book. It dates back to something like 400 AD. And it means Woring town means crossing town. Woring is a ford on a river or a crossing. And why that's important is back then, up until Roman times, the only way to cross that river to get north to Scotland was to go through that town. And that town became a trading place because of that. And its industry grew up because of that as well. So one of the things I'm going to mention now, and I'll mention a few times today, is your environment and the conditions around you play a huge role in who you can become and what change you can make. We'll come back to that a few times. So here's the big history lesson. That is not a brownfield S4 HANA migration plan, right? That's Stuart's huge timeline of revolutions. And we're going to go and explore it. And by the way, if you were here last year when I did this with drills or you've read any of my blogs, none of this is anything to do with SAP. But it'll loop back to something meaningful. Just need to bear with me. So, over on the left there was a bridge constructed over that town, over that river in that town, before 1500. In this time, in this era, Britain's surrounded by water, okay? It's an island, which means to trade with other places, it needs ships. To defend itself, it needs ships. And Henry VIII, one of the last things he did in his reign was create the British Navy. And it was both a merchant navy and a military navy. And if we wind on a little bit, when the Spanish Armada tried to come and take over in Elizabeth I's reign, the reason we could defend ourselves is because Henry VIII had the foresight to build a navy. It was actually the weather that saved her. If the Spanish had met up with the Dutch, they'd have invaded Britain. And we'd probably be speaking Spanish or Dutch now. But the weather conspired against them. Another example of your environment playing a role in who you are. Let's just talk about ships for a second. When that navy was built, ships like these galleons took something like 8 to 10 years to build. And they're only in service for about 12 years. But to build a ship like that, you had to have a whole supply chain of raw materials behind it. So you have to have rope. Yeah? You have to have hemp for rope. You have to have cloth to make sails. You have to have iron to make nails. You have to have wood to make the structure. And there's a process called compassing. Who's heard of compassing as a verb? Compassing is the art of growing trees in the right shape to make ships. So in order to make the rib of the ship, you'd bend a tree when it was young to make that shape. So the supply chain for making ships was 8 years of manufacture and about 30 years of tree growing before that. Yeah, these guys didn't have MRP systems. They didn't have SAP IBP. They just had to go into fields and forests and bend trees and hope that they were the right shape 10 years later to make a ship. And because of that, on the banks of the Thames in London, there was a whole industry of people who were early manufacturers. They were making ships and had a supply chain of materials. So Britain was kind of a really early manufacturing nation. Flipping to the white bit at the top, Oliver Cromwell was one of the first revolutionists I'm going to talk about. He was instrumental in creating what became the English Civil War, which ultimately beheaded King Charles I and ended the UK monarchy for a short period of time. It didn't really work out. And what he had to do eventually was bring back his brother, Charles II, to create kind of what Britain has today, which is a monarchy and a parliament working hand in hand. And what's really interesting about this guy stood up to what he didn't believe was right. That's actually a Tudor house in my hometown of Warrington where Oliver Cromwell stayed. On the map, you see that the last battle of the English Revolution was in that same town. And what's really interesting about it is within 20 years of that happening, of there being civil war, was the invention of the second insurance company in the world. The first was in Hamburg, the second was in London. After the Great Fire of London, the insurance industry was kicked off within 20 years of civil war. So we went from chaos to the ability to insure against fire. And what happened really quickly after that is the first bank was created. Lloyd's of London, the insurer that's still there today, was created. The Bank of England was created. And an economy started. And the main economy at the time would have been textiles. And the way textiles used to work is wealthy entrepreneurs would either use wool from sheep or they'd import cotton. And the process was called putting out. And what putting out involved was sending the raw materials. I'm not sure what the SAP material type is for raw materials, but sending raw materials to houses for them to, families, husbands and wives, would start to form that into products or semi-finished goods. So they'd weave in the homes. That picture there, again, that's about 2 miles from where I live. It's called a fustian cottage, or fustian cottages. Fustian was a material that they would wear. It was quite soft and warm. And the top of the house has a factory across the top of it. So they'd live in the house, and across the top, they'd have rolls of fustian cloth that was about 30 feet long. So people were working from home, literally working from home, without Microsoft Teams, well before manufacturing. And a few people have mentioned it today. I think it may have been Rishad that mentioned it around factories changing the way we work. People worked from home a long, long time ago. But then there were two things that happened. Similar to Donald Trump's tariffs, right? The Calico Act stopped the import of cotton into Britain from India. And suddenly, Britain's cotton industry started to boom. And then this was created. Does anyone know what that is? It's on the screen if you can read. It's a shuttle. It's a shuttle. Flying shuttle. And I've put revolutionist names in brackets beneath these. This was designed by John Kay. As a side story, my history teacher at school had one of these, and one day we were speaking, ignoring the teacher at the back of the class, and we heard a huge bang, and looked round, and this was stuck in the wall at the back of the class. And from then on, we really concentrated. Right? Just saying, right? Just in case anyone wants to look at the phones while I'm talking. But what this was technology, and it had a business benefit. So the yield from cotton manufacturing at home went up 50-fold with the invention of this. Early technology with a business benefit. The Newcomen steam engine was invented around the same time. It's a big lump of a machine that could just pump water out of mines. It wasn't very useful. But then, a little bit later, James Watt invented the rotating steam engine. Now, another piece of technology. These canals, exactly the same part of geography that I showed before, the first two canals, pretty much in the world, the Egyptians had kind of a form of canal, but the first two canals in the modern era were here and here. So one connecting the town of Warrington and St Helens, one connecting the estuary of the Mersey through to a town which is a coal mining town. Now, the benefit of that is a horse on a muddy road can pull about 1 ton of weight, and that's if the roads aren't muddy. On a canal, the same horse can pull 50 tons, right? Is that a business benefit? Yeah? Have I just changed the KPI with the invention of technology? So another one in the Industrial Revolution where a piece of technology instantly transformed things. The cost of transporting cotton reduced by 75% as a result of that. But this is where shit got real, right, in the Industrial Revolution. Because what happened here is the spinning jenny was invented by James Hargreaves, and then the spinning frame, and then the spinning mule. And all of those things were machines that massively increased the yield that comes from cotton manufacture. And they also took things away from houses into mills or factories. And they tended to be near to flowing rivers because they'd use a water wheel to power them. Does any architects in the room want to explain to me how a water wheel works? Anyone want to offer up a description? How does a water wheel work? Say again?
Potential energy.
Yeah, that's a scientific one. Just to explain it in simple terms. What the water flows and what happens. How does it flow underneath the wheel and turn it, or over the top? Over the top, right. Does everyone agree? Does water flow over the top? Sometimes it flows underneath. Yeah, the river flows underneath and turns the wheel. Sometimes it's over the top. Is there a big difference between those two things? There really is. If the water stops flowing in a river with option 1, the wheel stops turning. With option 2, if I can dam a river and release the water, the wheel carries on turning. You'd call that availability, right? That's 99% availability versus 80% availability. It's a nuance. You can take for granted how something works, but a little nuance in the design, that's a requirement. There's a requirement of the water will turn the wheel, or the water will turn the wheel even when there's no flow of water. So what that meant is that with the definition or the invention of the steam engine, you could also then start to assist the power of mills, not just with water, but with steam. And then you could replace the water with steam, which meant you didn't need rivers to have mills, which meant they moved to cities. And when they moved to cities, it meant they were closer to populations. But then what started? Who's heard of the term Luddite? Has anyone ever been accused of being a Luddite at work? What's a Luddite? An idiot.
We'll start with old school thinking.
Old school thinking. So the way the word Luddite comes from is people would smash up factories because they thought they were going to take the jobs away. And the word Luddite comes from blaming that on an apprentice who didn't even exist, called Lud. And for 20 years, they blamed somebody for smashing up the equipment because they were pushing back against technology. So there's a pushback against technology. Frederick Engels lived in Manchester around this time. So this was all happening in Manchester. When you powered mills by steam, the number of mills in Manchester in 12 years went from 0 to 42 mills, all with horrific working conditions, all with children, women, men, all with injuries, all with no health and safety. And it changed the way we work. And these two, Engels, and Karl Marx met Engels in Manchester in about 1845. Within 5 years of that, those two published the Communist Manifesto. Now, I'm no communist, obviously, but the intent behind the Communist Manifesto was to keep safe workers when you had entrepreneurs trying to make money out of mills. The intent was to keep people safe. There was other things going on around the same time. The Factory Act limited child labour. 20 years after that, there was something called the 10-Hour Act, which mandated that children couldn't work any more than 10 hours per day for 6 days a week. What did the first Factory Act do? If that one was helping kids not work for more than 60 hours a week, what happened first time round? Right, so all these people here were pushing back on the impact of technology on society. Then the steam train came along. So Richard Trevithick invented the first steam locomotive. It was that heavy, it couldn't be supported by rails. So he kind of invented the concept of a steam train, but couldn't get it to work. It was something like 70 years later when that was improved. And Stephenson's rocket, this was the second steam train, actually. So George Stephenson invented the first intercity railway, that was a passenger railway, that ran from Liverpool to Manchester. Again, keep going back to this geography. Actually goes through my hometown. The first railway death was in my hometown as well. This thing went into competition with about 20 other steam engines and won. Nothing to do with the fact the father and son, the father designed the railway, the son designed the engine. It was nothing to do with that. It was actually the only one that could pull the weight. Now, to give Paul some kudos, about 60 years after the invention of the railroad and railroads coming to America, we didn't have time zones before we had railroads, right? It was actually a Canadian Paul, right, who invented something called standard railway time. And then we got time zones. And then we standardized on Greenwich Mean Time. So if it wasn't for steam engines and railways, we wouldn't have time zones. Massive demand for coal, houses, factories, trains. Coal mining, the volume of coal mined was huge. And then canals. Before the Panama Canal was constructed, this is the Manchester Ship Canal. So it connected, this here's Liverpool again, with Manchester. Again, my last house was 50 metres from this ship canal. Ships going straight through the centre of town, straight through town centres, with bridges swinging out the way to let them through. Massive engineering feats. Again, it's just transport and logistics, innovation, just to get coal and cotton and things moving through more quickly. Little call out there. I'm going to keep calling out back to geography for a few reasons, but the Titanic sinking is on there. The captain of the Titanic was actually married in the school, in the church next to where my kids went to school, which is quite eerie. I was a best man at a wedding once and used that as a fact at the wedding, and everyone didn't really go down well, to be honest. I'm going to flip this to sport. At the start of the day, first video you saw was the Super Bowl video. There's some origins behind this. If you think back to the history of where American football came from, in Britain we've been playing what is now soccer for centuries. You know, people kicking pigs' heads down medieval streets was early football. In about, I think it was 1823, somebody in a school in the Midlands in England picked up a football and ran with it. And the school was in a town called Rugby. And that was the invention of rugby. Baseball was invented after that. American Association football, which is today's soccer, was formed formally then American football. And here, the Rugby Football Union was formed. So rugby became an actual thing. And the town I live in formed its rugby team in about 1895 or 1876, I think it may have been, called Warrington Zingari. That was before Manchester United, Everton, Manchester City and Liverpool. So rugby was a thing quite early in this part of the world. But what happened is these guys in schools that played it were fairly upper class people and would play it in schools to keep teenage boys out of mischief. When it hit the north of England, what was happening there was all of this industry was going on. So every mill, every mine, every railway, lots of people were employed in dirty, difficult, gritty industries. Up here, it wasn't about keeping teenage boys out of mischief. It was about giving grown men an outlet. And what happened is all of these organisations decided to build a rugby team to attract workers, right? Because technology had changed so much, some of those organisations needed to attract a workforce. So they said, well, we'll have a rugby team, and our rugby team will be the pride of our mine or our mill. Then people work 6 days a week. So what happened there was they had to pay people to pay for the rugby team instead of work, to pay them to play sport as part of their job. Imagine that now. You get a day off to play soccer or something like that. All of the people who were from the middle class areas revolted against that and said, no way, this is an amateur sport, you can't be paid to play it. So some revolutionists in 1895 decided to split those two sports off. One today is called rugby union, one's called rugby league. And it was the sport started entirely because of the Industrial Revolution. Who was here last year? I had power drills last year, didn't I? No PowerPoints, right? So I thought I'd call back to that a little bit. So this is bringing it back to the modern day, just after 30 years after the Berlin airlift, which is also done from a US airbase in the town that I'm from as well. About 20 years after that, Black & Decker invented the world's first MRP system. And within 30 years, there were 8,500 companies using MRP. It's about the same number as the number of live S4HANA customers, right? And that was the trigger that started ERP. You all know the history of SAP being founded and S4HANA and all the latest announcements, but the trigger for that was MRP. And I'm here today, one, because Paul asked me to, but secondly, because on Saturday I'm going to Vegas. And there you go, that's my stripping moment. I'm going to Vegas on Saturday because my hometown team is playing against another local team from the Industrial Revolution in a league game in Vegas. So they're coming to America. And I am as well, and we are as well. So I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But I'm going to call back to this before I wrap up with the 5 takeaways for you. Those 2 towns are in that area that I mentioned at the start. So it's strange that 2 northern English towns are coming to Vegas to play in a rugby match. But what's even stranger, when you string this together, every team in the league that they play in, bar one, is within a 129-mile strip that's 30 miles long. That is the entire train of the Industrial Revolution. And all of those things we spoke about today, led to the creation of a sport and a league. That sport's now, it's Australia's national sport. It's played in New Zealand and Fiji and Papua New Guinea and Tonga. And none of that would have happened without something like that. That was the trigger. That was the technology trigger. I played this sport growing up, and it's kind of, if I didn't play it, I don't think I'd have the values I have today. I wouldn't have done what I've done today. So forming a consultancy that is really well known in Europe and starting to get known in the US is kind of, for me, a result of all of this. This is a bit of a personal story for me, but I think I'm going to pull some things out of it for you as well. So these are my 5 really big takeaways, right? If you want to become a revolutionist, we've seen loads of revolutionists here. We've seen people that have invented things, people that have protected kids, people that have split sports, people that have generated MRP systems, loads of innovation. I'm going to give you 5 massive takeaways that jump back to the story I've told. The first one, and I mentioned this right at the start, revolutions are built on the environments and conditions that surround you. The reason that town became that town is because it had a river crossing. There's environments and conditions around you that will either make or restrict your ability to be a revolutionist. And if you haven't got that environment or conditions, change your environment and change your conditions. Right? If you want to drive change, your environment and the conditions around you are everything. The second one, revolutions deploy technology entirely for competitive advantage. That competitive advantage. When I talked about Manchester earlier, there was a point in that timeline where Manchester was responsible, it was called Cottonopolis at the time, it was responsible for 80% of the world's textile production in a country that doesn't grow cotton. Right? It's like today, Uber control 90% of taxi rides but don't own any cars. That's revolution. It's changing the business model. Whenever and a few speakers today have spoken about this a lot, don't implement technology unless it's driving competitive advantage. You're not going to sell it to people unless you're going to link it back to some imperative and some change in your business. Revolutions drive technological change and adapt environments for people and society. The thing I spoke about in the middle, the guys who wrote the Communist Manifesto, the guys from Parliament who were there to protect kids from working 60 hours a week, right? Some revolutionists will innovate on technology. Some people deal with the change impact, what that means to people. fourth one. It's a really, 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 really important one, this. And Rishad mentioned this morning, which is technology doesn't replace people in revolutions. It just creates demand for differently skilled people. How many years have we heard the robots are taking all of our jobs, or AI will take all our jobs? It's not true. It just creates different jobs. Just creates need for different people. Those people who were weaving in their houses, 100 years later, they were engineers on steam trains. They were building machinery to create textiles. They were creating ship canals. As technology moves, the skills you need to create that change an awful lot. And I'll take it back to my rugby metaphor as well. If rugby clubs back in the 1890s created teams to attract staff to work for them, when there's huge demand for skills, right, you need to do things differently to attract people to work for you. You can't just put a job ad on LinkedIn and hope. Right, your employee offer has to change. You have to make people connected to what you do, connected to your purpose. And the last point I'm going to make, because we've talked about this a lot, up until today, you guys thought there was just one type of water wheel. You also thought there was one type of rugby, right? And there's two. You take for granted things. You can walk past things and take them for granted. Innocuous things trigger and accelerate revolutions. And your job is just to be curious enough to find them. Just don't walk past things. Ask questions about things. Understand what's going on beneath things. Challenge everything. Question everything. They're my 5 big things. If I was going to give you something as brain implants today, if you want to learn from what's happened in prior revolutions and work out how to take it to future ones, this stuff helps. I'm going to finish by introducing myself, because I didn't do that at the start, because I thought it'd be boring. So I run a company called ResultingIT. So we're a UK-based consulting business, SAP consulting business. We're not an SI. We work 100% business side. So we focus on everything from independent phase zero, selecting SIs, helping people to drive programs, helping people with testing, with adoption, and also building centres of excellence at the end of that. We're based in the UK, but like the rugby team that I support, we're coming to America this year. We've got a couple of US customers already, and we're opening in Atlanta in the middle of the year. What I've taught you through today, I know it's not a normal concept for an enterprise architecture topic, but we're not a normal consultancy. So if you want normal, call the others. If you want something a bit different, then pick the phone up. And that's me done, Paul. Accent and all.
Yeah, well, we have time for questions. And by the way, I recorded all in Otter, so I'll send it to you in case you didn't understand a bloody word of what he said. and I encourage you as well, on our YouTube channel, the ESAP community, Stuart did his presentation last year on filling the holes in your S4HANA business case. So it's a great talk to rewatch with just Stuart and drills. So I encourage you to check it out on our channel. Any questions for Stuart? Mark?
Okay, which country do you think they were made in?
What country do you think the shoes were made in?
From the colors of your clothes, maybe Ukraine?
I'll take that as an insult. These are British shoes. These are Doc Martens.
Any other questions for Stuart? Mark?
Your office is opening when in Atlanta?
Probably July.
July.
Yeah, I'm working with, I was chatting to Mark before, we're doing a phase zero for a big utility company at the moment. We've done quite a bit of work in the US in the past. I think we recognise that asking SIs to do phase zero is kind of like inviting the fox into the chicken coop a little bit. So we just do a really independent job of that. Thanks, Mark, for that setup. You bowl, I'll bat.
So I have one question for you folks. You know, it's interesting. Stuart and I used to do, pre-COVID, it was 2019, a whole series of road shows, not sure why, on customer center of excellence topic. You know, we do with other, away from the speaker. We do with another experts in different areas the whole theme of running, setting up a customer center of excellence. You know, keep your SAP system running, keep it evolving, extract value, so on and so forth. 5 different cities in 2019, COVID hit, right? And it's interesting, the whole topic of COE. I'm curious, we don't hear as much talk about it anymore, but it's probably needed more than ever, right? Or it's a seaweed of seaweeds, so to speak, whatever it is. I'm just curious from this crowd in your organizations, do you think that it's worthwhile to revisit that topic of the whole customer center of excellence from an SAP context? Show of hands.
There's actually a variation of that. So when you do RISE, so there's a variation off that. So when you do RISE, some tasks go to SAP, but some new services, I'm thinking ITSM sort of model, appear that you didn't have to have before, and then add on to that the concept of a BTP COE, because maybe you don't want, you want that in a center versus distributed horizontally. So the topic actually has gotten bigger.
Yeah.
And commentary on that, it's probably more important than ever.
Yeah, I agree with that. We're in the UK, we did one of these in Chicago in October.
October 23rd, actually.
How do you remember dates? You're so weird.
Booked so many things.
He remembers every date of everything. We in the UK, we run these things called S4 masterclasses. So we'll take a whole exec team right through everything they need to think about in the move to S4. And we either run them public or we run them
around phase 0,
for an
right?
organisation. Yeah, but it's going through everything you need to think about on that journey, and the opportunity to ask absolutely stupid questions that you don't want to ask in front of your SI or ask in front of SAP, and that some of the skills it elicits that you may need, like BTP, but also the nuances around where the scope changes depending on, for basis in particular.
You need someone who manages consumption spending.
Yeah.
You need someone who manages the relationships to RISE. All sorts of new roles appear in that organization.
So you talked about technology change, new skills, right?
Yeah. And it is that I spoke to somebody this morning. There's a guy from Caterpillar that I was in the transport with this morning. I don't think he is, but they've just gone live with S4, done it entirely in-house, self-sufficient, and are now building a BTP COE. They didn't use an SI for any of it, and it's been really successful. And I think that there's a model where that used to work really well, still works really well. The challenge you've got, and it's the reason I mentioned the attracting staff in the Industrial Revolution. Most of your staff will be in an SAP environment are going to be later in their, grey hair, grey beards, whereas you've got to build some new people through now, and BTP is the opportunity to do that. And I think the reason it is because the code base it's based on, it's not our app, it's based on a code base that most people learn in school. So you can attract a different type of developer as part of your strategy to move clean core. It's not just a technical decision, it's a decision around skills and resources as well in a market where there won't be ABAPers in 15, 20 years. They'll all be sat on a beach or laying a coffin.
I like the beach option better, Stuart. Yeah. So lastly, one key takeaway for this audience. What's the one thing you'd most like them to take away from your talk today?
I think it's from the things I mentioned at the end, the curiosity thing. A couple of the last speakers have mentioned, the guy, I forget the guy's name, who was from McKinsey before.
Darwin.
Oh yeah, he talked about curiosity, and that really resonated with me. You take so much for granted, you just walk past things without them even clicking. The water wheel example is a really good example of that. There's always things you can unpack in things. You just need to be curious and understand it. If I'm honest, I didn't know anything about the Industrial Revolution until Paul asked me to speak, and last year I thought, that might be fun to learn. So I probably sounded like I knew what I was talking about there, right? But I didn't know any of that stuff in November. But just unpack a topic, get into it, and you'll learn things, and you'll learn things from it as well. So
great. And actually, you probably teed up some of Rashad's talk very well to go next. And by the way, great shirt.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks, Stuart. So we have until about 4:30. Rashad will come back again, and we'll sort of close things down. So are you ready to upgrade your mental operating systems? That will be next. Thank you.